Clean from TranceMusicMastery.com, and in this video I'm going to continue walking through the sketch project Mirrors, which is based on a number of MIDI clips and samples provided by myloops.net. And the kit that I based this sketch project on, again, is kit 61 called Mirrors, and that is from the Trance Obsession Volume 1. This video I'm going to focus on Pluck 1 and Pluck 2. So I'm going to start with Pluck 1, and this clip here represents the full clip for the Pluck part that's included in this kit. And let's just go ahead and look at that real quick. Now, if you recall from the last video that we did, the previous one, I went through the pad and I talked about the chord progression and analyzed that. And what's going to be interesting is if we copy this pad progression here, copy the notes, let me just grab these real quick, and overlay them onto the Pluck part, you're going to see where the notes overlap. And I'll do that in a minute. Let me go ahead and just play through this part real quick. And I'll just kill the reverb there. Now, if I just copy over the chord progression from the pad part, you can see that a number of notes overlap actually. And for the moment, I'm just going to shift these up one octave. We can see now, if you recall, the chord progression followed the F minor, G sharp major, A sharp minor, and it added a ninth, which is up here, if you recall, by that extending that C sharp here during the third chord. And then it was a C sharp major with an added sixth at the end here. So let's go ahead and look at what notes are in common here. We've got the C and the G sharp. This guy from the first chord and this guy. So we can delete the F. And if we look at that, we actually see the F in the lower part here. This would correspond to the F minor chord because it's basically playing an F, a G sharp, and a C. Alright, so what I'm doing here is pointing out how the choice of pluck notes that are being included in this sequence actually come from the chord that's being played at the same time by the pad. Alright, so we're playing the C and the G sharp on this pluck line. You see how those match perfectly. Alright, so I'm going to delete those now, and now we'll look at the second chord here, and we can see that these notes are D sharp and C, and we have a D sharp here and a C up top. Alright, so I can delete the G sharp, and it turns out that G sharp is in fact bass, the root of the chord. So the D sharp and the C form the other notes in that chord. So let me go ahead and move this down, and you can see how those overlap. So here's the chord here, and we're playing two notes from the chord that's being played in the pad in this pluck part. So let me go back up here. I'll just delete this one, delete this one. Okay, now we're looking at the third chord, alright, and I'll bring this one in. That third chord down here on A sharp, so this was the A sharp minor with an add 9, okay, the ninth interval was added, which is the C. And we're playing two notes from this chord, or well, we're playing two notes. Let's see if they're in the chord. So we've got an F, there's an F there, so this note is part from the chord. And then an A sharp, and in fact there is an A sharp in the chord here, okay, because it's in fact an A sharp minor with an add 9. Alright, so the basic idea here is just, again, just to point out that, you know, once you have your chord progression, you can just take some notes from the chord itself, and you can use those to form your pluck melody, and that way everything will be harmonically compatible. Okay, and then I'm just going to drag this over as well. So now let's just focus on this last chord. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting. If we look at this last chord, if you recall, it's a C sharp major with an added sixth. Okay, so let's see what notes are being played here. Notice how it plays a set of 3 notes and then changes to a different set of 3 notes. Okay, the pluck part, that is. Now it's playing an F and a C alternating. Alright, so there is an F here and no C. Okay, so that's interesting. There's no C in this chord. But C is a fifth from F, so the C is going to be compatible with this F, the pluck note that's being played. And if we look at the next set of notes, we've got a D sharp, and we don't play a D sharp in the chord anywhere. Okay, which is interesting. And then a G sharp, and there is a G sharp in the chord. And the interval from a D sharp to a G sharp is a fourth, perfect fourth. So those are harmonically compatible, these 2 notes. And because these notes, the F and the D sharp here, are from this chord, then it is compatible with the chord. Alright, this part. So I'm going to delete these because we don't need them anymore. And I'm just going to expand this a little bit and just play through this sequence again, just so you can hear these intervals being played. Now this is a C up to G sharp. That's a sixth, an interval of a sixth. We've got a D sharp up to C. That's an interval of a sixth as well. And then we have an F up to A sharp. That is a interval of a fourth. And then an F up to C, which again is an interval of a fifth. And then a D up to G, which is an interval of a fourth. So one more time, playing this. Alright, let's look at the programming for this pluck sound. I'll talk more about what I'm doing here in terms of the arrangement in the last video of this tutorial series. This is a pluck. I'm using part B. For part A, I just zeroed out the voices. Part B, I've got a oscillator B1 with a triangle wave and 4 voices. Retrig is enabled. For the amplifier envelope, fast attack, decay a little less than halfway, low sustain to give it that pluck sound so that it hits its maximum volume very quickly and then decays rather rapidly to 0. And then release just less than half. And then oscillator B2 layered in with oscillator B1. It's a 1 voice triangle wave. It's up 1 octave. Okay? And its retrig is enabled as well. And in this case, detune isn't doing anything, only 1 voice. Over here on oscillator B1, let's just look at that real quick. Detune is slight detuning. Stereo is at max. And then both oscillators are panned in the center. If we notice part A, the way I do have this patch configured, and this is probably just as I was going through trying different things to tweak the sound, I ended up cutting out oscillator A1 and A2 altogether, and that just left me with the part B. But one thing from part A that is active is this filter A, because the input select is taking input from both parts A and B and running them through the filter with 12 dB low pass, cutoffs at 0, and resonance is at 0, and then there's some drive here. And so if I just play a note, I am modulating the pitch here a little bit with this LFO1. Just very slight amount, 0.14 on the gain. And overall amount is 1.33 and the rate is 1/8. Okay, so for about the duration of the pluck note itself, I think those might be 16th notes. Let's check. These are 1/8 notes. So for the duration of the pluck note as it's played and as it decays, there's going to be a slight pitch modulation. Alright, and that changed because on this track I do have some automation of the auto filter, but I'll go through that in the next video. So this sounds like that. So let me just play the sequence with it dry. Okay, so that takes care of the Silent 1 patch. Now, I do have a number of effects that I'm using. I'm using both ping pongs and reverb, so let's demonstrate both of those. Well, in fact, before I do that, let's continue on with the track, looking at the effects that are on the Silent 1 after the sound is generated. So, after that, I'm adding a... In fact, let me disable both of these so we can hear how it sounds just from Silent 1. Okay, so if I add the next effect as an auto filter, and what I'm doing here is I do have some modulation on that, or automation actually, not modulation. I have that automated as I said before, and I'm using that basically to provide, you know, that dark feel in the break. More muted, and then as it plays forward it brightens up as the filter opens up. But I'll go into more details about how that actually works in the next video. There's an EQ8 at the tail end of this to cut out some of the low end of the Pluck sound and to brighten the mid-range and the high frequencies. So let me disable each of these. So you can hear how that took out some of the low end on that Pluck sound. Then a boost to the mid frequencies, and then finally node 4 here is going to provide an overall lift using a high shelf filter. Just helps give it a little more presence. And then finally what we'll do is we'll enable each of the ping pong delays in the reverb. Okay, and we can hear how it sounds with these bass parts as well. Okay, that takes care of Pluck 1, alright? And as I said, when I go through these other parts here, how I got this part, in the last video in the series when I go through the entire arrangement and talk through some of the finer details of how I've arranged this piece. This is the starting MIDI clip and the sound of the Pluck 1 track. Alright, so let's look at Pluck 2. Now for Pluck 2, what I wanted is something that would play along with Pluck 1, okay? Basically play the same part, but be a different sound. Be able to layer in a different sound with the Pluck one and kind of help thicken it up and provide just a second voice, if you will, to that part. And the patch that I came up with and the way the EQ and everything is, with that all in place, it sounds like this. I'm just going to solo Pluck 2. So again, it's playing the same MIDI clip as Pluck number 1. Okay, same exact clip. It's just a different sound, and let's look at that next. So this sound, if I bring up Silent 1, I'm using, let's see, it's almost a saw lead type sound, right? But it's soft, it's not a harsh lead sound. And I'm using part A, part B, oscillators, A1, A2, all 4 oscillators are sawtooth waveforms, okay? So you can see sawtooth, 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 sawtooth. All 4 oscillators also are using 8 voices and have retrig enabled. And remember that retrig enabled means that it's gonna, the sound of the note, each time you hit a note, the sound, the starting sound is going to be the same, because what it's doing is it's causing these waves to start, the waves for each voice to start at the same point in the wave cycle. Okay. Now, octave-wise, pitch-wise, each oscillator A1 and A2 are both at octave 0. Fine-tuning on oscillator 1 is at 0, but notice how oscillator A2 I've got slightly tuned up, fine-tuned up, so that's going to help fatten up the sound. Let's look at part B. Both oscillator pitches are at octave 0, and in this case there's no adjustment to the fine-tuning. And then if we look at oscillator A1, there is some detuning here. So stereo is all the way at the minimum value, which means it's going to be pretty much a mono signal coming from oscillator A1. So it'll be dead center in the mix. It won't be spread across the spectrum, the stereo spectrum. So the reason I did that is I wanted some center image for this particular Pluck sound so that it would have some presence in the middle of the mix, the center of the mix. But then I did want it to have some wideness, so what I did with that is I used oscillator A2 and just increased its stereo to maximum. And then for part B, I have those stereos at maximum as well. Okay, so pretty basic oscillator setup. No effects, again, I'm not using any effects on board the Silent 1. Pretty much just my preference. Sometimes I will, but in this particular case I did not. Part A, both oscillators are using filter A. They're being routed into filter A. It's a low pass filter, 12 dB slope, and some drive, warm drive enabled. Key track, that helps change the filter cutoff frequency based on which note is being played, where it is on the keyboard, where it is on the scale. And let's see, some pitch modulation and some cutoff frequency modulation here by mod envelope 1. And that helps accentuate the plucky character for this patch. So now, let's just play a few notes from this guy. So let me go ahead and just disable each of these effects and the EQ. And I'll just play Silent 1 output. Okay, so next I added some compression to accentuate the pluck, basically give it some dynamic, more attack. Alright, and then for the filter I wanted to cut out some of the low end. And and that helps make room for the bass. Now, just to demonstrate this, you might not be, depending on your speaker system, and you might not be able to hear that low end change, but we can see it and detect it in a spectrum analyzer. So here's without the filter. Alright, and if we enable the filter, see how this side changed? In fact, let me scroll up here. There's some low-end rumble in this sound that I want to get rid of, and I can do that with the auto filter. And that'll make a nice clean area for the kick and the bass to continue to come through the mix. Okay, then likewise, I wanted to roll off a little bit of the high end as well. So I can do that using an auto filter here. So that way we can also automate this frequency cutoff on this filter and help sculpt it and bring it into the track to help with transitions and that type of thing as we transition from the break into this chorus part. So let me go ahead and enable the ping pong on this guy as well, ping pong delays and reverbs. And next I'll go ahead and play both Pluck 1 and Pluck 2 together. Okay, so that's it for the plucks, and now what we can do is listen to just the bass with the plucks and the pad so you can hear how it all comes together. Just these two sections of the track here. Okay, and let me just enable this reverb, and then now I can play this part of the track. Okay, that's it for the two Pluck tracks in this sketch project. And what I'm going to do in the next video is I'm going to talk about the pitch riser, the pitch sweep here, and a couple of the other little effects samples that we have in the track. There's like an explosion here and this sweep down. Talk about those. I'll walk through how those are set up, and then I'm also going to go into more details about the automation and how I've got this arranged from start to finish, so you don't want to miss that one. So I'll see you in the next video.